glazing, a lot of things, what I like to do is do a little bit of planning ahead of time. Not a ton, but a little bit. I like to at least have an idea of a few glazes that I'm going to use. And the other thing I would say, just as a tip, is that you don't need to put a lot of different glazes to get complex surfaces. So you don't need to come in here and kind of like, it's not like a water park. You know, you don't need to like play around and everything. We also don't want to get glaze on our hands. Like I bite my nails, so even if I don't have any open cuts or anything, and I wash my hands really well, if I get glaze underneath my fingernails and I bite my nails later, I might be ingesting some heavy metals, which are in some of these glazes. So really not trying to get glaze on your hands, don't want it in your eyes, don't want it in your mouth, don't eat it, all of that kind of stuff. Safety. And that's why we don't do any food or drinks in here, because it's easy to accidentally like splash something or someone else is making a glaze and stuff gets inside. Okay, so I'm going to keep it pretty simple because I also want to show some painting techniques to add detail on top of the glazes. So I'm going to start with just the Cone 6 white. And so I'm going to look for all the buckets. It should be marked on the lid and on the bucket, because it is possible for the lid to get put on the wrong bucket. So we want to be really careful that we do put them back in the same spot. But if there's ever a marking on the bucket, that's the one you want to pay attention to the most. Okay. So I'm going to pick up my glaze, move over to a comfortable working area. There's not a lot of people in here. This can be kind of a nice height. The ground's also fine. Pop it off, and then I want everyone to come look inside here. So everyone can see that there's a little like clear layer of water on top, and it looks kind of like gel or jelly or something underneath it, right? It's not stirred up. It's super, super important for you to spend a little bit of time stirring up all of your glazes before you use them. What we need, a glaze is composed of a very specific relationship of alumina, silica, and flux. And we need all of those things to be in suspension so that we get the right ratio on our pots so that glaze melts well. If you don't stir it all up, heavier particles could be at the bottom, lighter particles at the top, and you won't get an even application. So all of our stir sticks are back here in this green bucket. Get one out. And I'm just going to start stirring. This one was really had not been used in a while or was just remade and might need some adjusting. All of the glazes, after you've spent some time stirring them, should be at about the consistency of like 2% milk or whole milk. So a little bit thicker than water, but definitely not like yogurt or anything like that. So I would say that this glaze looks almost, it's close actually now that I'm stirring it, but it's a little bit, might be slightly on the thick side. It's just barely on the thick side. It would probably be okay. But if you ever have a question, if you start to stir a glaze and you're like, whoa, this looks kind of thick, and I'm not sure, definitely don't add water or do anything like that. Come grab Tommy, myself, or another instructor and have them look at it, because it's very easy to add too much water. But we can make quick adjustments to be sure that the glaze is at the right consistency. The issue being that if this is thick and you dip your pot in it, and you think, I've only done one coat, like that's fine, that's what Alex said to do. Well, it's a very thick coat, and that could still run off your piece. So the one coat policy is really contingent on the glazes all being at the right thickness. So I like to scrape the stir stick off like this just so I don't jerk everywhere. And whenever I'm doing this, this is our glaze washout bucket here. This shouldn't be left in here because it'll honestly just ruin the wood. But it's much easier to clean things quickly before it dries too much. I'm going to keep some sponges over here. So the stir sticks do need to be cleaned before you're finished, whether you do it immediately or later, obviously, because the other thing, we really don't want to cross-contaminate. We don't want to put a black glaze accidentally in the white glaze when we're introducing irons. We need to be careful about that. I am going to add just a little bit of water to this one.
When we buy commercial glaze, with time this glaze become thicker.
Mm-hmm. Water evaporates and it's
So we can add water to
your commercial glaze. Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, so they always say like 3 coats, but it's like the 3 coats only make sense if it's constantly at the same thickness, you know, the same quantity of water, and it's not. So the 3 coats is like a good safe range, but the reality is that you're trying to just get an even coat of glaze. Just like when you're making pots on the wheel or you're coil building, you know, if you're building with your eyes closed and your feet or something, that's fine as long as it's even. You know, like that's the main rule. Trying not to splash this over myself. But I am.
If you want to add stain to white glaze to make it more colorful or change or experiment, how much gram we have to add for half liter?
It's a good question, and it's a ceramics 3 question. So whenever you're making glazes from scratch, you're making them in powder form first before you add water. So all of the ratio measurements are by weight without the inclusion of water. So you can't, it's very difficult to take like a liter of glaze here and add stain into it because you are also accounting for the weight of water.
So we create a powder mix for white glaze,
and then you add colorant.
Add colorant to this powder mix.
Yeah, and then water, which is why we don't do it in Ceramics 1, because in the later classes you do get to you learn how to make glazes from scratch using the powder, and that's when we can start to change the colors more. I am going to show you a way to paint on top of this glaze that will change the color a little bit, but you can't.
On top?
It's going to make it blue, like blue and white cobalt.
Okay.
But you cannot just like add stuff into here. You won't ever have like a real. It'll be very difficult to keep up with the quantities that you're actually adding to ever be able to reproduce it or anything. Okay, so I got my glaze stirred up. We're gonna try it. I'm gonna try on this little piece first. I think it looks pretty good. It might be like slightly on the thick side. I would be worried about doing 2 coats of this glaze, but I'm just gonna do 1 coat, same color over the whole thing.
To deepen coat or to brush and coat?
The thickness. This is, well, all of these glazes are meant for dipping, so they should all be at that whole milk 2% consistency. Yeah, it is a real question though. Like consistencies that you use glazes at might change depending on how you're using them. So I'm going to show everyone how to use these tongs. They're just dipping tongs. You can reach inside your pieces and hold them this way so you don't get your hands in the glaze. This is a great way, a good tool to use if you're trying to get 1 even coat of glaze over the entirety of the piece. So I'm going to start all white on this one.
Does it matter which side of the tongs you have on the outside?
See, I think people often say, and I think it does make sense, that this wider, not wider, but what we would say, this horizontal shape is on the outside. I think. I honestly don't pay attention to it too much.
Okay.
Things, you do have to be a little careful, like you can squeeze these too tight, especially if you're making really thin pots and break your pot, or if you have a big heavy pot and you're trying to hold it at the rim, you know, it could break. So you just have to, those are all kind of somewhat intuitive things, but yeah, no, you are like pinching your brittle ceramics between 2 pieces. So if the glaze is at the right consistency, I should just submerge the piece, pull it right back out. I'm not going under and sitting and waiting or anything like that. Okay.
So you said don't glaze the bottom, right?
Yeah, I'm going to glaze it right now though. I'm going to show you how to take it off later. So I'm just going, and this is, so I know I have to go deep enough for the glaze to get over the top and fill this. Right, has everyone seen Pirates of the Caribbean? The first, no one's seen, you seen Pirates of the Caribbean?
No, I'm gonna go. I don't really know this.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like there's in that first movie, there's that scene where they walk underneath water with a boat over their head and they're using it as like an air pocket. So if you're glazing ceramics and you go straight down like this, you're holding air in here. So you won't necessarily get if you wanted it to be all wide and I was going this direction, I'd have to find a way to break that air pocket to get glaze to flow into here. Or I need to go this direction. And it is possible to go this way and to use that air pocket, and you do this like pop motion, and it puts glaze up on the inside. So I'm just going to go straight down, break that edge, fill it up, take it out, and turn it over. Now, I know that this glaze, from experience, doesn't have a whole lot of propensity for running, but it definitely will run. And I would say that this is still just a little bit too thick. So I think that this will be okay as long as I don't add any more, but I'm gonna add some more water before all of you use it. I think this glaze may have just been remade recently because it looks like it maybe hasn't been sieved yet.
Why
Is
is
this-
it pinhole like that?
Yeah.
Some of it, so it's more likely to happen on the texture areas, and it's little bits of air trapped underneath the texture that I have on there. Or like my handle is cracking right there where I was bending it, so there's a little bit of air in there. Some glazes show this pinholing. This glaze in particular is going to melt and heal over, so I'm not too worried about that. If you get pinholing in your glaze after you fired it, there's usually some other issue at play. It's not like this air here that's causing it. So I'm just holding it for a second while it's drying, but it dries pretty quick. It's still a little wet there. I try not to do what I just did. Now I got a little fingerprint. But this glaze is a little bit thick, that's why it's taking somewhat
You dipped it really fast.
long to dry. Yeah, the glaze is just, I mean, it's good to show that like, even though it was a fast dip, the glaze is a little bit thick. This is like kind of the max thickness of coat that I want. But I'm gonna go ahead and just set it down on the bottom because I know it's okay if that gets messed up. Pull these off carefully and lift them up. I'm gonna come over here, and these are really easy to wash off quickly, just in this water. So those little marks from the tool usually heal over. Most glazes are just going to melt over that. You don't need to do any like, sometimes people do this kind of thing, like cover it up, but it's usually fine. So now I'll go in water. I'm gonna let that one dry. Stir a little bit, and then I'm gonna glaze another piece. So what color should I glaze the bowls? I want you all to tell me like what techniques are you interested in learning?
Spraying.
You want to learn spraying? Okay. Okay, I can show you spraying in a little bit. I can show everyone spraying in a second. What about like 2 colors, multiple colors?
Mm-hmm.
Is that interesting?
We have 2 very distinct
Colors?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I'll do 1, 2 colors, and I'll show another way. So what's really cool about glaze is that it does things that only glaze can do. It's not like paint. So you can't mix a yellow glaze and a blue glaze and get a green glaze. It just doesn't work that way. Because you're not really mixing, like you're going through, there's all these chemical changes happening. So like what makes a glaze blue, copper, or cobalt, and what makes a glaze yellow, which is probably like iron or a commercial stain, when you mix those things together, like they just do something else completely. All of that to say, if we choose 2 glazes here, so I'm going to choose the white glaze, and then what's another good glaze? You want like a high contrast?
Yeah.
Let's do the Tomoku. Can someone help me find the Tomoku bucket?
It's in front of you. Yeah, on the bottom. Okay, on your.
Right here. It's got
Try
the-
Tomoku. Okay. This way. So, do you want to stir this up for me while I work on the white? That one looks better. Stir sticks are just better. So one quick way of getting two colors, so like I was saying a second ago, when you're glazing and they overlap, where you mix two glazes together, it isn't like mixing paint. So you're going to get a completely different new color where they overlap. So you can use two glazes, overlap them, and get three colors. So you don't necessarily need to use a lot of glazes to get a lot of different colors. So what I'm going to do is do half of this bowl in Tomoku, which is this dark kind of black-brown glaze in the middle here, and half of the bowl in the white, which I don't know actually if we have a Cone 6 white test tile.
Here.
Oh yeah, there it is. Yeah. It's kind of like a shiny white glaze. And this glaze, even though it's hard to tell, is actually semi-transparent. So if you have black underglaze underneath this glaze, it will actually show up. What I'm going to do, because I'm going to overlap, is I'm going to dip this bowl in Tomoku 2/3 of the way. I'm going to do that right now, and I'm just going to hold it where I'm not dipping it. I'm going to go all the way in, 2/3 of the way, pull it back out. And that's a great thickness for glaze here. And notice that I'm holding it and letting it drip this direction. If I flip it over really quick, it might run into an area that I don't want it to do. So it's drying. You can see it changing color right there. That's what we're looking for. And I need to wait for it to dry before I dip the other half. And while it's drying, I'm going to talk a little bit about removing glaze from the bottom. So there's two ways of doing it. Well, there's multiple ways. Two ways that we do it here. We have something called wax resist, which is in here, just a little bit, and it stays in this. I think there's a small container here that you can pour a little bit in and use these brushes. If you use wax resist and you have some left over, you want to be sure you pour it back in here. It just kind of dries out and gets nasty, and it doesn't work as well at that point. Our wax resist is water-based, so if you need to thin it out, you can add water. And it also means that you can wash your brushes out afterwards without them getting ruined. So this one hasn't been washed out as well, but if you use some of that soap and water, you'll be able to get the wax out. Latex waxes sort of ruin the brush. The disadvantage of a water-based wax is that it's more difficult to do some particular techniques because it will wash away if you don't want it to go away. That being said, it won't wash off your pots. Once it's on your pot, it's on your pot. So you don't want to get wax in places you don't want it to be. The only way to get it off is to put it through the kiln again to melt it out. So bisque is still really porous. Like this is technically ceramic now. It's no longer clay. We can't add water and make it into clay again. But it's still very, very porous. It's low fire. The clay has not matured or what we call vitrified yet. The porosity is good, but when we dip it in glaze, as it's drying, the bisqueware is absorbing all of the water out of the glaze and leaving us just with an even coat of the glaze composition on the surface. But the porosity also means that it absorbs wax that's water-based into the pores, and you can't get it off, okay? So if you're going to use wax, you've got to be a little bit careful. I'm going to show you how I like to do it. And I rarely use wax for the bottom of I almost never use it for the bottom of the pieces. There's only a few scenarios, but you can also use it for decorating, which I'm going to show you. So I'm going to pour just a little bit out. Whoops, a little bit goes a long ways. And now I have it on my fingers. This is really what happens is you're touching stuff and you don't realize it's on your fingers, and you go to pick up all of your other pots, and you get little bits of wax. So if I'm going to put wax on the bottom of something, I like to use a sponge rather than a brush. It's just how I learned it. So I'm going to apply a little bit of wax to the bottom of this foot. This foot, the bowl doesn't have a very tall foot here, right? And so I'm worried that if I glaze the inside right here, that it could, in some scenario, if it's too thick and it even drips just the tiniest amount, it's going to stick to the shelf. So if you have a really tall foot, you can probably glaze the inside. But if it's shorter like this, you might want to add wax, which is what I'm going to do. So I have a damp sponge. I'm just dipping it in the wax, and I like to squeeze out any excess. I don't want it to run anywhere. And if you're doing the foot ring, I try and be really consistent with my pressure and placement so that I get an even wax line. And that's plenty. That will resist glaze. And I'm going to go ahead and fill in the inside here. You don't need to like add some crazy amounts or anything. That is plenty, and it'll dry pretty quick. But what I think wax is really, really great for is doing decorating. So I'm going to start to add. I'm just going to do some circles here. Okay. Now I'm going to turn it upside down while it dries. I'm going to come back to my other piece now. My white glaze is still pretty stirred up. I definitely have just been in the habit of really always stirring it before I use it. So now I'm going to dip the other half, and I'm going to go 2/3 again. So I have this big overlap in the middle where I'm going to get a new color. Pull it out. It might still be a little bit thick. So we'll fire all of these so you can all see them too. I only brought in one example to show something else. But this is such a great way of breaking up your composition and a really easy way to get lots of different colors. And people tend to really like the combination of the white over Tomoku or the white over the navy blue. It does look kind of cool. It does some like marbling effects. I'm going to set that one down. And I'm done with that one outside except cleaning the foot. Okay. There's plenty going on. It's going to be an even coat of glaze. It's going to be food safe that way. I'm going to be able to use it regularly. I'm not worried about it running. And so now this is probably dry enough. It's pretty quick. So what I'm going to do, what am I going to do? I'm going to do Tomoku. And I want to cover this whole thing in Tomoku, okay? And then I'm going to do some other stuff. So one way I could do that, right, is by using these tongs. And I would have to go underneath the liquid like that and back out and let it drip. It starts to get a little tricky when things get this big. But it's completely doable. Another way of covering one thing in one glaze is to do half and half. And if you remember, when we look at these test tiles, where glazes are thicker, sometimes they look a little bit different than where they're thinner. So even if it's the same glaze, and I go half and half and I overlap in the middle, I'm probably going to get another slightly, very subtle different color. So with the Tomoku, where it's thinner, it's this lighter brown color, and where it's thicker, it's black. So again, one glaze, but slightly different thicknesses, and I'm going to get we're going to get different colors on here out of one glaze. And all of those subtleties, when you're glazing, makes a big difference, okay? So that's the wax resist. Obviously glaze is not sticking, but it will sit on the surface and it will dry there. The water will eventually evaporate, even though the bisqueware is not soaking it up. So what that means, and this is always the case, even if you just do wax, have people learned before, like put wax on the bottom of the foot? Is that how you did it?
I tried it, but it's been not very successful for me.
What was not successful about it?
The wax is messy and I was struggling with
Wax,
getting it only where I wanted it and not other places.
wax has a higher skill level of entry than you think. When people first start using wax, it's very hard to get an even line here. More than likely your line's going to vary. You don't get clean lines. It gets in places you don't want it. I really avoid this, except for a few things. It is nice to wax the interior of this foot, because otherwise I have to come back and like clean it off. But it's hard to get a clean wax line. So I'm just letting this get to a point that it's dry and I can hold it. And I'm going to dip the other half down again. So I have a good even coat of Tomoku over the whole bowl now. Where it's overlapped, it's going to be slightly darker. So I'm increasing the kind of subtlety and variation of the surface, which is a good thing. And this also talks about process, right? Like as for me, as someone that goes to looks at ceramics, when I see that line of a thicker glaze, I know how the person glazed it. So it's a little bit of evidence of process as well. So we're going to set that to the side, let it dry for just a little bit longer. It's going to take longer to dry in this middle part. You can actually see it happening now. It's wanting to dry faster where it's just one coat. 2 coats is taking a little bit longer. So it needs to dry just for a few minutes. And I'm going to go back to my other piece and show a different way of keeping glaze off the bottom. So it was very high-tech carpet square nailed to a board. This works really, really well. It just has to be very wet. I'm going to get it wet. Occasionally it gets a lot of glaze in it, which means we need some kind of flat tool. This is not ideal to clean it out, but we try and do that. This is pretty clean right now. Wet carpet, I'm going to show this. And you can set your piece down on the carpet, twist it back and forth, and you get a very clean bottom really quickly with a very even line. And I don't have to worry about my hand moving around with wax. So easy. This will not work though. I'm going to show this in a second. It doesn't work as well for a few different things. This technique of cleaning the bottom also assumes that you have a very even coat of glaze. If you have a really thick coat of glaze and you use this, it gives you a very nice edge, but it's not the edge is not up very high. So if you think your glaze is going to run, this is not really enough safe room. It's not enough tolerance, right? So, and the other thing that it has trouble doing is if your foot is not very tall. So if you have a tall foot, it works super nice. You get a really, really clean just edge on the bottom of the foot. What I think is going to happen here is that it's going to clean the edge of the foot, and then it's going to clean just a little bit in the middle. And it looks kind of silly. So the foot's really clean. This is pretty clean, but now I have all this glaze here that I have to deal with. And this doesn't look very good in the end. You've already put all of this time into making your pieces. You don't want to all of a sudden tap out here at the bottom and have someone turn it over. So we're going to have to find another way to finish cleaning that off in a minute. But again, if the foot's tall, it does work really well. I don't want to set it that way. Okay. So the wax has resisted the glaze, but there's obviously still glaze stuck to the surface of the wax. If you leave that, it will show up in the end. So all the wax is doing is stopping the bisqueware from absorbing the glaze. The wax melts at like 400 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's going to melt way before the glaze does. And what's going to happen is the wax is going to melt, the glaze is going to stay, and then it's going to eventually melt and stick to your pot. So whenever you wax, you still always have to come back and clean it off.
So on those white circles for decoration, would the glaze look about like it looks on there right now, or would it kind of melt in and get more muddy looking? Like that right now, it looks like kind of a cool effect.
Yeah, it'll look kind of like that. Yeah, it stays sort of apart that way. And these little circles are harder to clean off. I'm gonna. It's totally. I really just need a smaller sponge. Yeah. So I would go around and need to do all of that, and I will do that before I put that in the kiln. But I want to show you something else. So what could be cool is maybe you've done sgraffito on your piece, and you want to see the sgraffito through, but you want to also use an opaque glaze. You could put wax over your sgraffito and then dip it in an opaque glaze, and you'd see the sgraffito and the glaze. Or maybe you like white stoneware is cool, but I really want some bright blue circles or bright yellow circles. You could put bright yellow underglaze, then wax over the underglaze, and then dip it. And you'd get the black glaze plus really bright yellow circles. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, and so the other thing that you can use it for is I'm going to go back in between and add my half circles. Oftentimes, a brush in ceramics is not the right tool. You have to be careful because this glaze will wash away. So I'm trying not, if anything, I probably want to be dabbing this in place more. They do make sponges that are like cut to certain shapes. Like if you want stars all over your pot, you can get a star sponge and dip it in wax and put that on your pieces. Then I'll do that so you can all see. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a second dip. Yeah, just on the rim where I put this wax. But I'm not going to dip the whole thing because I know I've already got one, and in the middle, I already have 2 coats of glaze. This is going to be a 3rd coat of glaze right in the middle, and it's probably going to want to run. So if you are going to do multiple colors and multiple dips, it needs to be in the top half. You can't go below the bottom half part because it's much more likely to run. But this is a way, and I'm doing a very simple version of this technique. People make highly detailed drawings using wax resist this way. You can make really, really detailed drawings.
Is it going to be a problem that some of the tomoku is still wet over the wax resist?
Here?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's probably not ideal, you're right. Probably contaminating. Is that what you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, good call. What is there? Bug crawling? Is it stuck in the glaze?
Yeah, there's like a little bug like this.
It seems a lot faster with the commercial brush-on glazes with needing so many layers. It's like the more layers you do, the longer it takes to dry, and I always find myself like impatient to I'm there all day glazing.
Yeah, brushing
It's much faster.
Brushing is really hard because it's hard to get an even coat of glaze. Okay, so I tried to stay as flat as I could. This is getting heavy. I'm gonna try this. Because if I turn it, I was using that air inside to my advantage. Now, I've already looked. I didn't get a super clean line around the rim. The glaze actually looks thin. Did I just stir it up?
Yeah.
Yeah, I must not have stirred it up enough. And I'll show you what this thin edge looks like. Now, we'll see what it looks like after it's fired. It's probably going to be a very soft edge that will look okay, that will look nice. But it's a good thing to see. So I'm just trying to let that dry. It's going to continue to take longer to dry. Like you said, so right there, that's what thin, that very much looks like thin glaze. I'm gonna let it dry a little bit, and then I'll take a sponge and clean up all of those wax spots. But now I'm going to have brown glaze on the edges, a thicker line of black all the way through. I'm gonna have white clay showing all the way through the glaze, and then where I've overlapped it, I'm going to get a marbling effect with either black in the middle or brown. Yeah, so anyways, there's a very simple thing. Yeah, it looks like that. It's a very simple thing, but you get a lot of different colors. So I'm gonna set it to the side while it dries, and then show.
Can you show this graffito in one of them?
Sgraffito? What do you mean?
How to do it?
Well, so sgraffito is usually with slip on wet clay. You mean brushing paint?
No, when you take off some of the
Glaze. You can't really, you mean draw through it? You can draw, you could scratch back through the glaze if you didn't want glaze somewhere. You could draw lines through it. I'm gonna show something else. I'm gonna make this bowl really weird in a second and show you another kind of cool technique that I don't show very often because people don't end up using it. But what I'm gonna show really quickly is how to now paint on here. So this was the same glaze, I think, on a cup in the reduction kiln. So the clay looks really dark. The glaze looks a little bit different. The cool thing about the reduction is you get these little iron specks in your glaze, so if you like that, reduction's good for that. And then this is cobalt. So everyone's probably seen blue and white ceramics at some point in their life. And that is usually cobalt on porcelain. And it's cobalt oxide that we have here. So we have these little containers.
Does this work in the oxidation kiln too, or only in the reduction?
No, they work both. Now, whenever if you're going to try this and you have questions, that's completely okay. I'd rather you come ask me questions. You need the tiniest amount of cobalt will show up super blue. You will barely see it now and it will be very blue later. So you need really, really small quantities, and it's also an expensive material. It's fine for us to use it. I just don't want you to not be happy with what you made and to use a ton of cobalt at the same time.
That's a really tiny bit.
That's a tiny bit, yeah. And I might end up adding more, but it's really, really small. I'm gonna add a little bit of water. Just set it like in here. So that's probably enough for for a lot of different pots. The cool thing about cobalt is that it's very much like painting with ink. So people also get really good at painting with cobalt. And you can, by diluting it, by adding more water, it's less dark. There's less pigment, essentially. Like watercolor, too. So when I made these, I did a lighter circle of cobalt, so more water, and then darker, more cobalt in the inside. So not only can you use wax to start breaking up your shape, but I could also define shape through value with cobalt on top of it, which is sort of what I'm going to do now. So I got these brushes from the first cabinet on the left out there. If you're looking at all the white cabinets, we have community brushes. I brought different ones in. I don't know if I'm gonna end up using this one. We have some really big ones, so you have a big piece and you just want one big brush mark. And you don't want lots of little coloring marks. Sometimes I like the coloring marks, but if you look closely here, you can see when I was coloring this in, I was moving my brush up and down. Everyone see that? So it retains all of that, which is nice. You know, it's a good thing. But it means that you want to be particular about what brushes you're using. So I'm going to do something similar here and just start by doing some circles, turn my brush on the side. So even that's going to be very blue. And you can see there's a difference there. That outline is going to be a darker blue, which was not so much on purpose, but part of the process, which is fine. So it's going to be a little lighter here. I tend, when I'm doing this, to take the attitude of not worrying too much. That was some cobalt that wasn't mixed up as well. That's going to show up more blue. But if you wanted to really practice, you could get really, really good at doing this. So what I'm going to do now is to try and get just some thicker, more pigment without having to add more in to the end of my brush. These brushes, some people are very good at using these. These are like ink brushes. This one actually looks like the end of it has been cut or something, it's been damaged in some way, because you can usually twirl it and get a really, really fine point. So these brushes are really versatile in that you can use them sideways to get really wide marks, and then get really, really fine marks as well on the end. And you also get marks by varying your pressure. Less pressure, more pressure. So I could just make dashes here. You can see it's liquidy and it's wanting to run, so I'm going to wait a second. And this is really simple, but it's a fun way of doing it. If I turn it right now, it's going to drip. So I'm just letting it dry for a second. I'm going to try and load the brush up more. Yeah, I wish this one wasn't damaged. On this side, I'm going to try writing, let's see, what are we at? 20, 25. So now I have my date on the other side forever. If you want to sign your pieces right here, you know, you can write your name. You could do a smiley face if you want to, whatever you want. Like it really is just like painting and drawing. And it's fun to, yeah, it's okay to be silly with it too. So we want to be sure to wash the brush out. You don't obviously put this cobalt back in here. So that's also part of the reason I'm using such small amounts. What you can do when you're finished, and if you're like, oh, I don't know how much to use, just come ask one of us, okay? Because some of these, or if you're not sure, you can't remember which one it is, come ask us, because there's a lot of things up here that we would not want to be putting on the outside of the pot. So we can set this back over here, and the water will evaporate, and we'll just get cobalt powder in the water. So sometimes I will just come to this and add a little bit of water. That's what's already left in here. It's like water, it really is like water.
So are those all cobalt back there?
I think they're all cobalt, yeah. I might wash this one out and start it again. The reason I actually added some in there is because I'm not positive what that is. I'm not positive, like, but this is what we really don't want to happen. This is like a lot of wasted material. I don't think that's cobalt. I think that's black underglaze that someone has put in there. But we don't want that to happen. Okay. So the last thing that I wanted to show, I was going to show that other wax technique. So this is taking a very long time to dry now because I've layered so much. So I'm going to show it on here. So I'm going to go back to my wax circle. Oh, did I spill that? I guess I did. It's my brush. And then, does someone mind grabbing me like a needle tool really quickly, or does anyone have like a pen on them or a sharp knife? Okay. Is it okay if I scratch through it with the surface? So, once the wax dries, this is kind of like glazed sgraffito. You can, if you're careful, use something really sharp to just scratch just through the surface. Your needle tool works well, but let's say, and this works better with certain waxes and certain glazes. Like I'm just gonna do a little grid. The grid, when I cut the wax, it sometimes wants to pull up in the squares. So I'm being really light here. I'm really just trying to cut through the wax and not through the glaze. Thank you.
It's half the reason I use it is because it can kind of be used in a very like fine way because it's got that sheet foot, so it's like really round. So you can make
I can now essentially like pipe almost cobalt just into those little lines. And if you're careful, you can usually get it to kind of flow into the lines you've just made. This I want that thicker. There we go. I want thicker cobalt. Well, this brush is also awful. I'm trying to find a brush that has a fine point. I'm not going to worry too much because I can, after it's all the way dry, carefully wipe it off with a sponge. I've really only seen. So I learned this from someone when I was an undergraduate. They were a graduate student, and they started doing. Drawing's a big part of their work, and so they started doing this on their pots. And we'll fire this so you can all see. And it is crazy. It looks like a tiny pin mark in the end. You can have a lot of control doing this way. If you wanted to do like cross hatching and drawing, you could make like really, really detailed drawings this way. It just takes a little bit more practice and effort. So all this extra wax that I put around, I don't have to worry about. It'll just burn off. I could now, if I wanted to, paint glaze you know, around this area again and start layering glazes that way. But this is a cool technique to get really, it's like glaze sgraffito, as close as I know. So the last thing I wanted to show was, what do I do now? I didn't use wax. I thought, okay, the carpet's easy, but the foot's not tall enough, and I have this extra glaze here. I don't know what to do.
Clean with water.
To clean the bottom. So if it's all the way dry, if it's drier, I like to use, like, your wooden knife tool is really good for this.
Why can't you just take the sponge and?
I can, I just want to you can just take a sponge. It's more work for me to find this other tool right now. But I want to show you. I'm going to try using this. If it's dry, it'll scrape off really much easier. You don't have as much cleanup later. So we want to put all of our extra glaze into our glaze waste.
Do you want that wood tool?
I think it's okay. The wood tool is better than this, just so everyone knows. We really don't want to use this because I don't want to damage this. So you can scrape most of it off. It looks like there's a lot of iron.
You talk about like the wood,
Like the wooden knife throwing tool.
oh yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Or your wooden rib. But the wood works really good. The metal, you know, you're gonna dull something, and then I can come back and take it off. So the Tomoko has so much iron in it, it's going to be really hard to ever get it much cleaner than that. And that's okay, it won't really show up so much. But just to show, after the area that I scraped first and then I wiped, it got clean really quickly. Whereas this area that I didn't, you have to like really scrub with your sponge. And you're kind of like smearing it around. So I find it to be easier. I'm gonna try not to put very much glaze down the seam too. I mean, it's still, so this is definitely possible, but just giving it a scrape first. It goes it's a lot faster. And then this piece is ready to go out onto which shelf?
The reduction shelf.
Reduction shelf? Okay, we'll put it in reduction. I also knocked that, so I gotta fix that a little bit there. And this is the other, if your foot is short, I do recommend putting wax in the middle, because it's so hard to get it out of these corners too. But if you have a tall foot or something with a relatively flat bottom like this, the carpet's quick and easy. Okay, so yeah, I'll put some of these on the reduction shelf. I'll let that one dry. It just needs a lot of dry time because we've layered glazes, and then I'll come back and clean the wax circles off of that one, and then we'll fire it, and I'll show everyone when it finishes. Anyone else have any other like specific glazing questions?